In section 30, we begin to look at what happens when data doesn't perfectly fit a model. So maybe it doesn't perfectly fit a linear model or an exponential model, but there might be some things that fit pretty close. So in activity 1, we're taking some data points, 1, 2, 3, 5, 5, 3, and 7, 9, and we're going to create what's called a scatter plot. We're basically going to take those points, put them on a grid, and then see if we can create a line or a curve to fit through those points. Now the reality is that because of this data point right here, the 5, 3, we're going to run into some issues. The other values tend to increase as we move down, or if we increase the x value, the output value increases. But here we kind of throw a fly in the ointment, if you will. So we're going to take a look at taking these data points and see what we get. So first thing we're going to do is graph those guys. And here's my point 1, 2, and here's my point 3, 5, 5, 3, and then 7, 9. All of it is there. Now I'm trying to create what's called a regression model, or a line of best fit, or curve of best fit, to go through all those points. And the reality is it can't go through all those points. It just won't happen. So we have a line that will be close enough to all those points that we can use it to approximate. So all I did is I kind of eyeballed where I think those values would be and where that line would actually fit so that it's fairly close to the data. And then I'm getting a graph that looks something like that. So then we're asked to predict the value of f of 12. So we go to 12 on the input and find out where that's at. It looks like it's off the grid a little bit, maybe 13. But here's the reality. I don't know if my line's accurate or not. I have no way of knowing just by hand if my line is good or not. So what we're going to get into is what's called regression. We're going to take an equation or take some data points and create an equation out of it. So we're going to take those points 1, 2, 3, 5, 5, 3, and 7, 9, and we're going to enter them into our calculator. Now on the website, again, all the handout is there, kind of the step-by-step, but I'm going to show you as we go through how to actually do this scatter plot and everything else. So the first thing we want to do is enter the data in. That's probably the most important thing, is to make sure you have the data actually in there. So we go to the stat menu, because we have just some random points that we want to enter in. And we want to make sure we're on edit, because we're going to edit our list. So I'm going to hit enter. And I don't have anything in list 1 or list 2, and that's good, because I'm going to actually have to use that information and enter that information in. If I did, we'll have to clear it out, and I'll show you a little bit later how to do that. List 1 for our purposes are going to be our inputs, so those are the x values. So 1, and enter, 3, enter, 5, enter, and 7, enter. And list 2 are going to be our output values, our f of x values. So I arrow over, and enter 2, 5, 3. There we go. And 9. Now that I have all that information in, I can actually go through and try and figure out, all right, what is the scatter plot going to look like? And we can see how accurate we were. So to do that, I have to turn my stat plots on. So I'm going to press second, and then y equals. You see there's a little stat plot there. And I'm going to turn on stat plot 1. I'm going to enter all this into stat plot 1. So I'm going to hit enter. And you'll notice that it's highlighted as off right here, but I want it to be on. So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter to do that. Type 1, I want to leave that as is. I want that scatter plot. I want x and y to be list 1 and list 2 respectively. The marks we can change if we want, and the color we can change, but everything else you want to pretty much leave the same as it is. Now there's ways to do this with setting windows. We're not going to worry so much about that, because there is a nice function in your calculator that will take the statistics and make a window out of that. And to do that, we go to the zoom menu, and zoom stat down there at the bottom is the one we want. It's going to take the statistics that we have and create a window from that. So I'll hit 9, and it will graph. And I have something stored. Let me get, oh boy, got some old graphs in here. Let me get those out of there. If it stops graph. Let's try that again. Alright, oh, there we go. So I got some stuff here that I gotta get rid of. Alright, let me get rid of these guys. And that's a good point, that if you are doing a scatter plot and you see a bunch of points all of a sudden, or lines all of a sudden, that probably means that you had graphed something previously. All right, there's our scatter plot. So those are our 4 points that we had graphed on activity 1. Now what we're going to do next is to actually create a value or an equation based on that information. So I'm going to go ahead and quit out of here by going to the stat menu. And instead of looking just at the stat plots, I want to actually create an equation. So I'm going to go to Calc, which will calculate some things. And I'm going to go to option 4, which is linear regression. And it's in that form ax plus b. Notice that it's not option 9. That is natural log regression. That is not linear regression. And option 8 will just kind of flip-flop your slope and your y-intercept. It's the same kind of idea. All right, so I want this to calculate list 1 as my x, list 2 as my y. Nothing's different there. I haven't the slightest clue what this one does, so we're going to leave it blank. But here's the cool part. We can take that equation that we create, and it will store it into whatever variable we want to store it in. So I'm going to arrow down until I'm at this, store regression equation. To call up the equations, I'm going to press alpha trace. And you'll notice all my y variables or y equations that I could plug in are called up. There's nothing there yet, but we're going to store it there. So I'm going to just go ahead and hit enter, or I can press 1, either way, and I'm going to store this equation into y1. And then I'm going to go down to calculate, and it will give me my equation. So 0.95x plus 0.95. Here's the cool part. Once we do that, and I'll show you off to the side here, it takes our information, it takes that equation and it's stored it in there. That's what we wanted it to do. It will take that graph, and it will also create the table of values for us. So I know those are kind of small to see, but I'm going to go ahead and go to y equals, and you'll see that there's my equation. I'm going to hit graph, and we've got our scatter plot with the new graph now from the equation that we created. And then we can also use the table to pick out anything we need. So we might need to know what happens when the input is 2. Well, we can find it using the table. Or more importantly, maybe, what happens when the output is 800? Where's that going to happen? The table will be very helpful in doing that. So on to activity number 3. We'll get there. Page down thing will be a little bit quicker. Here we go. All right, in activity number 3, we're given some data that we want to create an equation of line of best fit, storing it into y1, and then use that to predict some future values. So we'll go back to our calculator, and I'll show you how to clear out some things. So go back to stat, and I'm going to clear out our menu here so you can see the new keystrokes. And when we go back to a stat and edit our list, I'm going to go up to list 2 and press clear and enter, and it will clear it out. And I'll do the same thing in list 1, press clear, enter, and it's gone. I'm going to take my input values, which are t's, so on our table, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. 7, enter, 8, enter, there we go. And arrow over and put our output values, which are 4, 5, 6, 5, 7, 5, there we go, 7, and 6. From there, if we want, we can look at the scatter plot. We don't need to, though, because, again, we're just trying to look at what our equation is for this. It doesn't ask anything about the scatter plot itself. So I'm going to go to Stat, Calculate, and then option 4. Again, I can arrow down or I can just press 4. List 1 is your X, list 2 is your Y. That's not different. Frequency list we leave blank, and we're going to store it. And again, to store it, it's alpha, trace, and then we want Y1, so we'll hit enter and calculate. And so there's our equation. Again, there's a lot of stuff going on there, a lot of decimals. We're going to take our equation and round everything to 3 decimal places. So we'll have 0.429 and 3.143 for our A and our B values. Now, I'm not going to use that particular equation. I'm going to use the one that we stored. Now, I always want to verify. I want to make sure that we actually stored it properly. So I'm going to go to y equals, and it is there. If we don't store it, the next step won't work at all. All right, now to evaluate, I'm going to quit out of here. I'm going to go back to the home screen, so press second mode. And I want to call up the equation that I just stored. So I'm going to do alpha trace and y1. And I'm evaluating at 9, so I'm going to put in parentheses 9. And hit enter. And it calculated it for us. The old way would be you'd write the equation down, you got to type it or enter it in, then do all sorts of stuff with decimals. We're not even going to worry about that. Let the calculator handle the difficult computations. Do the same thing, alpha trace, and if we want to evaluate, let's say at 2, put that in parentheses, and there we go. It's 4. And if we want the next value at 15, there we go. Now that's one option. Another option is to use your table. So you do second graph, and then you could use your table and arrow down until you get your values and go from there. So a lot of different options on what you can do. But the main idea here is we also want to make sure that it's a function, because that's what we're trying to write. So we want to write it as p of t equals 0.49t plus 3.143, not y equals 0.429x plus 3.13. That's a little bit different, so be extremely careful with that. And then the other problem on that same activity, we took the same values. Again, we kind of skipped the setting up the window and the scatter plot because you don't really need it to write the equation of the line. So entered this stuff into y1, or list 1, and s of y into list 2. This is our input here, this is our output, and then created this equation based upon that. Then once we had that stored, use that equation to predict the other values. And that's really the main idea of this, is to make sure that when you're doing this, that you have to make sure you put your lists in correctly, that you